All right, I would say we start, and if someone else joins later, that is fine. So again, welcome everyone to today's community conversation on community-led anticipatory action. My name is Christina. I'm the partnership manager from the Anticipation Hub, and I always have the pleasure to co-host those community conversations. Our community conversations are webinar-based, uh, 1 hour sessions usually. We want those community conversations to be interactive and an exchange between our community of anticipatory action practitioners, researchers, etc. So please feel free to ask questions. We have some time at the end to also discuss, and it's meant to be a conversation. So really feel free to ask and to share. The community conversations are always recorded and later on uploaded to YouTube. So if you're not comfortable with your face or anything being on YouTube, please just let your camera turn off. And now just 1 or 2 short advertising slots. In the end of the year, the Global Dialogue Platform on Anticipatory Humanitarian Action will take place in Berlin in hybrid, and online registrations are now open. I will share the link with you so you can register and take part of our 3-day event. There will be sessions around everything. I think we have 23 topics with in total of 50 parallel sessions. Everything will be hybrid and you will have the chance to be part of it. And the second part of my advertising is directly related to the topic today. I want to advertise shortly our locally led anticipatory action working group. This is hosted by the Anticipation Hub, and the working group wants to facilitate a platform for local actors to exchange and collaborate on how locally led anticipatory action can be achieved and also developed. The goal is to generate tools and guidance, and of course to share the knowledge and strengthen the evidence. The working group is led by my colleague Sören here at the German Red Cross and Julia from Welthungerhilfe. And if you want to join, you can write this email, which I will drop into the chat, to join. The working group has been launched last year, and therefore it's in, let's say, child's shoes, but it's really developing the first things. What is currently, I guess, most interesting or really, really important is the development of a briefing paper on the benefits and the importance of locally led anticipatory action, as well as the co-creating of a collective locally led anticipatory action case study inventory, so a template, or to see what has been done, etc. Where are the case studies? Where is the evidence? I will drop some links into the chat, and with that, I will hand over to Sophie to introduce us to today's community conversation. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Christina. My name's Sophie Tolstrup. I'm the Director of Policy and Climate at Ground Truth Solutions, and I'll tell you a bit more about who we are later on in the agenda today. But it is a real pleasure to be invited to organise and co-host the Anticipation Hub community conversation today. Huge thanks to all the speakers who are going to share their knowledge and their time with you today. I will say that they all agreed to jump in at the very last minute due to my slightly poor organisation, so doubly appreciative of them taking the time. I am a huge believer in the importance and the centrality of networks like Anticipation Hub to bring us all out of the little silos in which we work, to help us see opportunities for working together across disciplines, across organisations. And so thanks to the Anticipation Hub team for all of the work and the time that you put into bringing us together today. So I haven't been part of previous Anticipation Hub community conversations, so I won't presume to speak on their behalf. But in general, when we come together in conversations around anticipatory action, we're really thinking about anticipatory action as an external action that is happening to communities on behalf of communities, that it's external actors coming in and supporting communities in advance of shocks. But of course, as everyone on this conversation knows very, very well, external action is a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle. All communities everywhere in the world have their own ways of seeing disasters coming, preparing for them, and responding to them. And that is by far the bulk of anticipatory action that happens in the world. So we wanted today to address two objectives. First of all, we wanted to understand more about what those anticipatory actions look like in communities around the world. So what are communities doing to try and see disasters coming, prepare for them, and respond to them? And how are those methods changing and being stressed in response to climate change and in response to the worsening hazards that communities are facing? And then secondly, with our external actor hats on, how can anticipatory action interventions better take into account, support, and mesh with what communities are already doing? So we're going to hear three examples on the call today from the speakers that we have gathered. And then we're really keen to hear from all of you on the call, examples from your own work, questions that you have for the speakers, challenges that you have for the speakers, and your thoughts about what this means for all of us in our work going forward. So I would encourage you, as you're hearing from speakers, do feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. After all the speakers have spoken, we'll open for a formal question and answer comment intervention session, but keep the comments coming in the chat as we go. So we're going to hear three examples today. So first of all, we're going to turn to Lina Rodriguez, who is a PhD candidate and research associate at the University of Geneva and United Nations University, and she's going to talk to us about community-based adaptation measures in the Andes. Then I'm going to take the mic back, and we're going to talk about some recent work that we did in Chad, working with communities in advance of floods to try and understand what anticipatory actions they were putting in place, how they were seeing floods coming, how that was meshing with or not meshing with external support. And then we're going to turn to Monica Cuba to give us some examples from Bolivia. Monica is the head of communication at Practical Action Bolivia. And when you've heard from the Andes, from Chad, and from Bolivia, we're going to turn over to all of you to hear examples from your own work and how you see this playing out in your anticipatory action programming globally. So I will hand the mic to Lina. Lina, Christina is in charge of the slides, so just tell her as you want to move through the slides. Very much looking forward to hearing examples from the Andes. So Lina, over to you.
Thank you, Sophie. Hello, everyone. My name is Lina Rodriguez. I am a research associate at the Global Mountain Safeguard Research Program of the United Nations University Environment and Human Security Institute, quite long name, and also a PhD student at the University of Geneva. What I will be presenting today belongs to the project, to the work that we've been doing with the University of Geneva for my PhD as part of the Adaptation at Altitude project or program. That it's this big program that has been going on since 5 years. And I will explain basically what it is about. So I will talk about an overview of the adaptation solutions in the Andes that we have been assessing, and the field work that we did to learn from the perspectives of beneficiary communities and on effectiveness and sustainability after projects and initiatives end. Next slide, please. So to start with, Adaptation at Altitude has put together this solutions portal that you can see here. This is basically a screenshot of how it looks like on the website. Here, multiple authors, and let's see, we've done a screening throughout the years of successful adaptation solutions across different mountain regions. I forgot to mention that, of course, this is only about mountains. So you can find solutions from all mountains around the world on different topics and on different aspects of adaptation. For this, we selected 5 successful adaptation solutions in the Andes that I will introduce now. Next slide, please. So for this, basically, we've been using this methodology or conceptual framework to analyze or assess these successful adaptation solutions. And the idea of this assessment is to analyze the effectiveness and sustainability of these adaptation solutions and how they've been perceived by the beneficiary communities. We aim to determine the impacts that solutions have had and are continuing to have at the local level, and also to identify the factors that have enabled or hindered their effectiveness and sustainability. So here you can see the methodology and how we've been, let's say, looking at the local, regional, and national levels depending on the adaptation solutions. And then for this, we, again, on the 5 solutions that we selected, we assess one per country, one in Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Argentina, through semi-structured interviews and online for 3 of them, and then 2 of them through field visits and interviews on the ground. And that's where I entered when I visited these communities, one in Colombia, one in Argentina. Next slide, please. Oops, here I forgot this. Lessons from Colombia and Argentina. Oh, this looks a bit funny. Apologies for that. So yeah, for Colombia, the adaptation for solution was about phenological monitoring network for birds. This takes place at the Lake Tota, that is like, let's say, 3 hours from the capital city of Colombia, Bogota. The problem is that there has been identified 168 species of birds that are endemic to these ecosystems that are basically wetlands and páramos, which is a very specific ecosystem in high altitude mountains in Colombia. There has been observation of alteration in ecosystems and changes in temperatures and rainfall that have impacted the populations and favored the entry of other species with regards to these birds. This adaptation solution, when they started looking at the birds through this project, was to establish a bird recognition and monitoring network that was also complemented by capacity training for phenological observers. Or basically, they analyzed how the behavior of these endemic birds and how they could also give us signals or information about changes in the ecosystems, increasing of temperatures, etc. This, of course, implied a territorial analysis of the basin for climate change adaptation and a diagnosis of potential areas for bird monitoring. The solution also looked for the design of a proposal for birdwatching tourism with the participation of communities and tourism operators in the basin. This is an area that is basically agriculturally intensive for spring onions. So you can see a picture here of these producers that are harvesting these onions. So when you go there, everything smells like onion. And it's very, let's say, visible. So the idea here is to basically try to diversify their livelihoods and income, and in a way that is, of course, more in line with climate change adaptation and the resilience of the ecosystem and the communities. So the effectiveness of this solution is that, of course, this strengthens local tourism and therefore the livelihoods and economic of the inhabitants. So this brought some diversification of activities. Of course, the communities were involved in research processes through bird watching. So we heard from people attending all this capacity training and about climate change and bird watching and bird behavior. So then they, of course, learned also to watch and understand their territories in that way. And of course, the recognition of indigenous and local knowledge about the biodiversity of the basin, because, of course, in these interactions, inhabitants were able to also inform about changes in the ecosystem and based on their local knowledge. The sustainability of this specific solution is, of course, that this promoted an accessible, rural, and sustainable tourism that is very distinct from mass tourism in some areas of the basin, where you can see glampings and very, let's say, high-income hotels, because this is it is the second highest lake in Latin America, in the Andes. So there's a lot of tourism going there that, of course, has a big impact on the ecosystem. So this was promoting this rural and sustainable tourism for these people. And this, of course, also led to more entrepreneurship. So, for instance, we witnessed some young people who were returning to their territories from the cities to open up restaurants or other touristic activities that were based on their traditions and even the cuisine and everything that is related to what they inherited as the knowledge. And of course, this also sparked interest among participating farmers. So for instance, these spring onion farmers were also interested in seeing how this was evolving. And they learned on, of course, sustainability of their territories and how to change these. And some of them were certified with good ecological practices, their farms. Next slide, please. The second solution that we assessed was in Argentina, the northern side of Argentina, in the border with Bolivia. It's called Jujuy province, and this is a solution implemented by Wetlands International, an international NGO. It's basically about wetland management and conservation in the Pozuelos biosphere, which is this biosphere monument in this area. The problem is that these high-ending wetlands have been degraded by mining, water diversion, and overgrazing. There's a lot of llamas and other type of animals that are grazing in these areas, and of course, droughts and increase of temperature, etc., have impacted their livelihoods because people depend on them as well. And of course, these make rural indigenous families vulnerable to drought and water scarcity. This climate change adaptation solution looked at community-led wetland restoration. So for Wetlands International, together with other organizations, of course, also regional and provincial authorities, work together to promote replanting, water retention through check dams and wetland management and restoration plan. This also supported sustainable grazing, so they taught these communities on rotational use, closures, lamans instead of sheep, and solar water pumps. For instance, here you can see this picture of this old lady who was showing us how to use this solar water pump, because of course this was a big improvement for women specifically, because they stayed in their communities and they used to bring buckets from the groundwater, through buckets, and with these solar water pumps, they also gain more time for their life and to take care of other things that are not only looking for water in the area. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is a coordinated effort between different actors. The effectiveness of this solution is that over 84 hectares of high-ending wetlands were restored. So you can see nature-based solutions also implemented through check dams and other types of solutions. This also provided reliable water for over around 180 Koja families. Koja is the type of let's say the indigenous families, and of course, as I was saying, women participation was strengthened through this. The sustainability is clear. Communities maintain works and pumps, and they are interested in continuing these efforts, and this ignited a lot of interesting in learning, and then knowledge embedded via indigenous governance and training manuals, because all these things were, of course, translated in their languages and were also, let's say, dispersed, shared through their networks. Next slide, please. Oh. Yeah, quickly. So some lessons learned. This is from the overall 5 adaptation solutions that we assessed in the Andes. We assessed that social dimensions matter as much as technical ones. So we need to invest in trust building with local institutions, and of course in women empowerment for adoption and sustainability of these initiatives. Integration across scales is critical, so local livelihood benefits directly linked to ecosystem services. And of course, adaptation gets more durable when it is connected to the broader governance and conservation agendas through this multi-stakeholder coordination. Ownership drives sustainability, so communities sustain practices that improve their daily lives. Institutional embedding secures continuity, and adaptation legacies provide as much evidence as project outputs. Conventional evaluations risk overestimating sustainability if they don't track post-project continuity. That is why it's very important to also assess what happened after these projects ended. Next slide, please. And finally, some of the challenges is that, of course, all these solutions unfortunately depend on political cycles, and budgets, of course, generate discontinuity and uncertainty. So you can see with that when, of course, governments change, for instance, in the case of Argentina, some of the resources were cut. And so the people who used to work on the implementation and continuity of these solutions now have no resources to continue. Demographic shifts could reduce long-term capacity for collective action. So that's, of course, the case of young people migrating to cities that abandon their territories, and all these initiatives then are difficult to maintain. Technical and operational gaps in remote mountain communities is, of course, a big challenge when you go to these areas because you need a big effort. And in this case, for instance, we were supported by Wetlands International in Argentina, who had this great network with communities, and also the access, technical and cars, etc., to access these communities. And of course, external pressures, such as mining in the case of Argentina. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lena. Really, really interesting. And I think very interesting for this crowd who I see looking through the list are probably more focused on the humanitarian end of the spectrum and on short-term shocks, to think about what community engagement and locally led action looks like for longer term adaptation. And with that said, I'm going to take us from long-term adaptation to very, very short-term shocks. So let me talk you through some. Oh, Monica, did you want to jump in there?
Sorry, it was a mistake. I was looking for a reaction.
No problem. Yeah, thank you very much. So we're going to shift now to some work that Ground Truth Solutions did in Chad, working with communities preparing for floods in Hadjalamis province in Chad. So we've published this report called Prevention is Better Than Cure in English and French, which I'll give you the link to at the end, but I'll just take you through some of the highlights of what communities told us during that study. Next slide, please. So just quickly, a little word on who we are. Many of you on the call are familiar, and many of you on the call know us, but Ground Truth Solutions is an organization working with crisis-affected communities around the world to try and understand their key challenges, how life is for them, their priorities and preferences, and how the external assistance that they are receiving is meeting or not meeting those preferences and priorities. It's then my particular job as the head of policy to work with humanitarian and other aid providers to try and ensure that they are changing the ways that they work based on the feedback that we're hearing from communities. And we have traditionally worked in humanitarian aid. We've now got this growing focus in on climate, which anyway comes up organically across the work that we do, because communities tell us more and more that they are focused on longer term climate adaptations. That's the support that they want in order to reduce the impacts of shocks on their lives. But this work kind of straddles both our humanitarian and climate work. Next slide, please. So this was a piece of work that we did in Chad, and the aim was to ensure that anticipatory action programs that were helping communities prepare for, thrive through and recover from floods were in line with the perceptions, preferences and priorities of communities most affected by that flooding. And this piece of work was kind of step one. It was a qualitative piece of research that we did that has then designed a larger survey tool that we're rolling out across Chad and applying to different types of hazard. This piece of work had a focus on flooding, and we worked with 2 communities in Hadjalamis province in the Hazari Albiar department. My colleague Elisa Schmidt, who many of you will know because she engages quite a lot with this network, led this piece of work and would have loved to lead this presentation today, but unfortunately she is en route to Gemina right now, so she's left the responsibility in my hands. Very happy to do that. Next slide, please. So through these conversations with the communities, we found a number of things that will be obvious to many of you on the call. But what's interesting is that when we present this research in more traditional humanitarian fora, people are very surprised by various aspects of this, including very surprised by the complexity of communities' own early warning and anticipatory actions, which I don't think anyone should be surprised, but we have been struck by how novel this information is to many of the actors that we work with. So number one, the impact of a shock does not just depend on the meteorological forecast. This is obvious, right? But the impact of floods on the communities we worked with really compounded pre-existing challenges, and the impact of flooding varied depending on the individual, what demographic group that individual was part of, where they lived, what they had been through in the past few years. And what we found interesting, which is summed up in this quote, is that 2022, the community experienced much bigger floods, so floods that kind of raised all of the flags on the early warning matrices and all of the early warning tools that were in place. And in 2024, they were expecting much smaller floods, but because of the damage done in 2022 to people's assets and resilience, people were much more fearful of the impact that these smaller floods were going to have in 2024. So just to read out a quote from one resident that we spoke to, in 2022, there were many consequences for communities, but they quickly recovered thanks to abundant harvests after the flood. The cost of living was also cheaper. But for 2024, the consequences will be unbearable due to the high cost of living. Food is scarce on the market and expensive. Communities, granaries and stores do not have the stock. So background socioeconomic pressures, the impact that the 2022 floods had all left this community less able to cope with what in purely meteorological terms was a smaller, less impactful flood that didn't cross the thresholds for triggering an anticipatory action response. Next slide, please. Number two, of course, not surprising to anyone on this call and the topic of the discussion that we're having today, communities have their own early warning systems based on traditional knowledge, based on their livelihoods. We worked with a fabulous colleague called Dan McClure, who put everything that we found into this quite complicated illustration. And I've just pulled a couple of panes from the illustration here. So everyone in the community is involved in assessing flood risks, and that is around things like the types of fish that are present in the river, the types of flowers that are blossoming on the river at a certain point and what they look like, the farming conditions, and older community members are kind of particularly looked for here for their experience of floods over time. Those intersect with official early warning messages and official assessments of risks, and different pockets of the community that we spoke to put different levels of trust in official versus traditional, different types of official, and some people critically in the community don't receive the official warnings at all. So some older people who are less mobile, women who have less access to radio and social networks and are excluded from some of the discussions, people from marginalized ethnic groups and people with lower levels of education just don't get the official assessments. Next slide, please. And then once warnings are issued, and that's both official warnings and warnings from community elders, from farmers, from people most trusted to see these floods coming, everyone swings into action. And in the communities we worked with, there were very organized, very well-drilled anticipatory action protocols, let's say, although of course they were not called that. So the community accessed community pooled funds to build dams. Richer people in the community kind of gave what they could. Women in particular swung into action, setting up community kitchens and feeding the men who were building sandbank dams. And they were able to mobilize several sources of funding from richer people in the community, from private companies, and from family living elsewhere and diaspora networks. So it's quite an organized series of events that happen once these early warnings are issued. Next slide, please. And finally, when we spoke to people about how they saw external assistance, and I'll get to more of this on the next slide, but people ultimately want external assistance to recognise and support the actions that are already ongoing. So make sure that the official information systems are reachable to more people, that they complement local news, see what community initiatives are existing and support them rather than setting up things in parallel. Link these to long-term disaster risk reduction efforts and involve the community in anticipatory action planning, which is probably the most important one. And here, just to pull a quote, encouraging young people and women to engage in income-generating activities could also reduce the consequences of flooding. So lots of suggestions and ideas from people we spoke to in the community about what kinds of external support would be most useful in reducing impact here. Next slide, please. So the downside of having me present rather than Elisa is that I can go into much less detail about the project findings, but the upside, or at least what's going to happen, is that as a policy person, I'm always thinking about what these findings mean for our broader work. So when we sort of mashed together the findings from Chad with some interesting findings from project in northeastern Nigeria, looking at cash more broadly and anticipatory action within that, to think, what does this data tell us as anticipatory action actors that we need to think about and do differently? So first of all, as just covered, anticipatory action needs to better support what people are already doing. So as anticipatory action actors, can we be better embedded in communities to understand where are they getting their warnings from? What anticipatory actions does the community engage in, and what support do they need with that? And what kinds of external support, like the income generating activities on the last slide, would help communities to better prepare? The second thing that came out loud and clear from both studies is that anticipatory action can anticipate the wrong things, is in these contexts anticipating the wrong thing. So sorry, I've pulled the same quote here, so you've already heard it, but the point is the same. The impact that a meteorological event or a shock will have on a community does not just depend on the magnitude of that shock in scientific terms. It depends what's going on with that community. Have they recently suffered other shocks? Has there been rapid inflation, as there was in both Chad and Nigeria at the time of this study? And who are the most vulnerable people, and what do they have access to? So unless we integrate that deep knowledge from and of the community, we're going to be anticipating the wrong things. The third thing that came out loud and clear, in particular from Nigeria, is that often anticipatory action support is too small or too minimal to have any kind of lasting impact. At the time that we did the study in northeastern Nigeria, inflation rates were through the roof. I think there was 30% inflation over the study period. And people said the cash distributions that were handed out were welcome. They were better than nothing, but they were gone within days. So that's in stark contrast to some of the assessments you see of anticipatory action programs, where we make big claims about having built people's resilience or having left people better off to weather future shocks. This was people literally telling us the cash lasted a couple of days, they spent it on food, and then it was gone and they were back in the same position. So we should be careful not to overestimate the impact that anticipatory action support can have. And then finally, again, this will not be news to anyone on this call. In the absence of longer term disaster preparedness measures, anticipatory action, of course, can only be a band-aid. So one of the quotes we had from Nigeria was, there's need for more cash support to enable us to get alternative farmlands, so we don't have to be solely dependent on areas that we know are prone to disasters and keep us relying on this like drip-fed cash assistance to recover from damages due to floods. So anticipatory action, as we all know, needs to be a small part of a much broader spectrum, where we're focusing on some of the actions that Lena has just taken us through, about how you sustainably support communities to weather worsening and changing disasters over time. Next slide, please. That's it from me. So if you want to hear more about the work in Chad, please visit our website, have a look at the Prevention is Better Than Cure report. We also wrote a blog synthesizing the findings of work in Chad and Nigeria that I'll put in the chat. And it's now my very great pleasure to hand over to Monica Cuba from Practical Action in Bolivia, who is going to talk to us about another example from Bolivia. So Monica, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning and afternoon to all. It has been mentioned that I am part of Practical Action team in Bolivia, and also that I want to mention that we are part of Zurich Alliance for Climate Resilience, as we work with emphasis in local level with the communities. Today we are going to share with you on a specific area of our work in this Climate Resilience Alliance that is related to indigenous communities. So previously, I want to mention something, that Bolivia is a population that mostly, according to the census, we are half indigenous people, yet the communities are often excluded for the decisions making, especially in the areas as like risk management, an early warning system. Of course, our country recognizes 36 languages and more than 50 people nations, indigenous nations. And this is happening from 2010 in Bolivia, where when we declare as plurinational state. So can you please share the next slide? So thank you. So we want to share a specific intervention that is related to Indigenous Inclusion for Informed Disaster Risk Reduction in Bolivia that aims to improve the integration of indigenous knowledge and needs into decision-making process. And so everybody can take part of this process, and this initiative is contributing from local to Zurich climate resilience and its vision. So I want to share that we made the next slide, please. Thank you. We did a research report map of risk and glossary and many multimedia products as part of some outputs that we reached by a report and research led by Click Global that was our partnership in these processes. And with the support of practical action, we aim to understand how communities prefer to receive disaster warnings, especially some of the main findings. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Are related to early warning alerts that often doesn't reach to communities, and also these communities that want to access to practical early warning systems to understand and include their practices and obviously their language so they can understand what is happening on time. Indigenous communities also feel that are left from all disaster planning processes and want to strengthen the disaster preparedness because they feel they aren't. And they aren't. They use traditional knowledge as part of their perception to predict the disasters. And also something that is very strong in Bolivia's area, indigenous areas, are that women and especially indigenous leaders hold the key knowledge from early warning and response. Some communities want to combine modern methods and technologies together with the traditional and national systems of early warning systems to strengthen their resilience and disaster preparedness. Maybe the next, please. So based on this information, what we proposed was to build together, and we reached together with the communities, was to build together emergency plans at local level, informed to the immediate levels and increase the participation and empowerment. So what we expect from this is that at the end of the process, not only this process, but the process we are following together with the Zurich Climate Alliance, Resilience Alliance, is to advocate to national level to include local tools and policies to strengthen their capacity to disaster risk reduction and resilience. So we reach to train indigenous leaders in disaster risk reduction, early warning systems, and risk territorialization. Also, we facilitated the participation in national level related to this topic, identified and recognized traditional knowledge and practices, and have dialogues and reflections on how they can validate and include this information from local early warning system to national level. And this was linked to the National Indigenous Platform, which became an important ally for all the process. These results are related to how this can be incorporated not only in local early warning systems, as I mentioned, but also allows to be part of a wider space led by the Defense Civil Vice Ministry that is leading all the early warning system at Bolivia's level. Also, we have installed some local radios which have the objective to meet traditional knowledge and hydrometeorological information for this area. In Bolivia, radio is still being the main channel at rural area, and we are happy to say that, well, not happy, but inspired to say that this media supported the floods in the Amazon zone this year. informing people across the river that the floods were arriving and to take previsions on about this. So maybe the next, thank you. So to strengthen the capacities on disaster risk reduction, early warning system, and resilience, we consider the difference of the context, and we decided to organize a DDR course that was certificated in the Bolivia highland zone with the Aymara people, and after 5 weeks of working during night sessions, because also we included like adapt our work to their times and uses and customs, we are happy to say that today not only 30 people are going to be certificated, but the knowledge and interest about disaster risk reduction has increased not only with the authorities but also with young people that participated in this process. On the other side, something that we made different in the Amazon zone with the Takana people was to women's participation. So we strengthen not only capacity strength, but also Jesse approach in this zone. So we use a peer-to-peer methodology that together with the woman was called Women That Teach or Mujeres que Enseñan. And these Mujeres que Enseñan has become an intervention itself. It was designed with the Takana Woman Council and coordinated with the main council at this indigenous territory through its unit of disaster management. Also has was a result of a process worked and recognized into their life plan. And it was placed to strengthen local capacities on this topic and also supported the work from transformative gender approach and contribute also to their territory plan. What the objective was, maybe we can go to the next slide, please. The objective was to strengthen the capacity of Takana indigenous women, but also its Women Council in facilitating basic elements of disaster risk reduction, and we use this methodology that was presented in three phases. So the first one included the design of the methodology that was very participative and include all the women in this process, bring the main concept easy to understand and to identify in practices. The second step was to have a first workshop where we can, with women that were selected by their communities, and where we work at the concept, but also how to use the methodology that included very ludic experience as cards, risk maps, theater. And then another stage was the replicates in the most of the communities as possible. So women went into boats and traveled across the roads of their territory, reaching 17 communities from 21 and at least 300 people in these communities. And they called especially to vulnerable people as women, ancient people, and young people. So a colleague that was working together with them mentioned some days ago to us that it was clear that the participation of women are capable and have the support of their community. Also, that technical concepts were easier to understand thanks to the facilitator and the confidence to ask questions without fear of being wrong that usually can happen with external actors. And also participation was higher than in other occasions, not only due to the methodology, but also because the community was feeling close to this woman. And so that was a short overview of what we wanted to share to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was a fantastic example. And I think over the course of these presentations, we've gone from long to short term. We've gone from a bird's eye view to really integrating with communities and understanding what it is that makes communities tick and what those real challenges are to unlocking, supporting better community-driven early warning and anticipatory action. There's been a very lively discussion going on in the chat, and I think testament to the power of this group that we've had a question about anticipatory action for heat waves, and since the question was posed, we've had hundreds of resources posted. So I'm hopeful for a lively question, answer, comment section. We have just under 15 minutes left. So would love to hear from those of you in the room about whether you have any great examples from your work that you want to share. If you have any questions for or feedback to any of the presenters that you've heard today, or if you have any questions that you want to put to the wider group. So please raise your hand, or if you're feeling shy, type your question in the chat, and looking forward to hearing from you. I see a hand up from Jana. Can we turn to you?
Yes, can you hear me? Great.
We can.
Yeah, I was wondering, I saw something in the chat about this as well, but do you know of any experience that there is out there about integrating the traditional indigenous knowledge with these hydrological forecasts? This is something that we're looking into at ZOA right now.
Lena, thank goodness you've put your hand up, because my answer was going to be no, and I hope someone does. Lena, over to you.
Yes, Jana. In the past, I worked on this. It's called local technical agroclimatic committees, and it's exactly this. It's a participatory approach where you put together meteorological information with locally, local indigenous and local knowledge, and you can create bulletins, that are created for specific necessities of people at the local level. So it's quite interesting. Colombia, for instance, has implemented that and is now part of the adaptation plan, the National Adaptation Plan, and it has been also implemented by other countries in Latin America. So you can look at this LTAX. I can share the link with you.
Great,
thank you. That's great to hear.
Monica, you also had something to contribute here.
Yes, it's just what I just presented. From what I just presented, it related to two ways of working in that we are systematizing from this process. The first one is related on how the communities are understanding the bulletins and information that they are receiving from the meteorological services, and try to work with the meteorological service to make their language clearest for these spaces. And the second one is like working from the BDESI, from the Civil Defense Vice Ministry, and we are working together in a round table with them, with other institutions that are related to the early warning systems, and trying to understand the traditional or natural indicators that these people have, and to we are GPAs them and georeferenciation, sorry, of them. And then we are including that on the map and trying to validate the information, the traditional information, and to cross over how to reach these people. So we are working in that. It's not yet, we don't have any results yet, but we are working in this process together with the national authorities.
Great, thank you so much, Monica. Fantastic answers, and I'm glad that our panelists had them. If anyone else has experience or wants to share any resources on that question, please do put them down in the chat. Krutika, let's go to you next. So it was you that posed the question about anticipatory action for extreme heat, and lots of resources shared. Let me hand the mic to you for your question. Are you having trouble unmuting? Let me see if I can do it for you. Oh, no, I can't. Unable to unmute. Sorry, I don't know why that would be. While we try to fix that technical challenge, let me just turn to Anita, who also had her hand up, and then we'll come back to you when we fixed it.
Hi,
Anita, over
hi,
to
can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can.
Hi, thanks. So super interesting presentations. I'm really enjoying them. And I just wanted to point out a couple of resources that I think you'll find really helpful. It covers a couple of the questions that came up. Recently on the Hub, we did a forecasting webinar series, like the basics of forecasting for anticipatory action. And it's like a 5-part series. There's floods, cyclone, heat wave, cold wave, and the last one talks about indigenous and traditional forecasting and triggers for anticipatory action. It's kind of like, I would say, like an emerging topic, but of course there's a lot already going on. It just doesn't mean we've necessarily documented it very well and are sharing it very well. But so that conversation was quite led by a working group on the Anticipation Hub, the locally led anticipatory action working group, who I tend to go to for questions like this. What we did in the forecasting webinar series is we documented everybody's questions on local indigenous traditional forecasts and triggers, and a lot of the questions I think that you might have and that I've seen in the chat, and we wrote them up. So I'm just pasting in the chat now a link to the actual forecasting webinar series, which is really useful if you're looking at forecasting heat wave or any hazard for the first time. And then if you scroll right down to the bottom, there's a Q&A where myself and a bunch of the speakers and forecasters spent a long time writing up 100 answers to questions that people asked in the chat. And there's quite a lot of questions asked on indigenous and traditional triggers and forecasts. And as a teaser, I took a little screenshot there of the first question and answer that you'll find if you open up that Q&A PDF. So I hope those resources are useful. And I also mentioned in the chat, for anyone that wants to kind of know what's going on anywhere in anticipatory action, the global overview report, you can filter that by actions as well. So if you're specifically interested in health related actions or cash or something, you can filter by the actions, the country, the hazard, of course, and you can see, what was activated, and then, hopefully get in contact with those people and learn more from them, but also what's being developed. So if you're thinking about developing plans, local plans, for example, community-led plans, you can get in touch with people that are maybe doing the same thing. And it's a downloadable Excel spreadsheet that you can filter and by country and stuff. So we really hope that helps you to connect with other people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And just while you have the mic, and given that you're in overview of the literature mode, there's 2 additional questions in the chat that I wanted to put to you first, and then I'll go to our other speakers. So Kritika, who had mic problems, and I'm so sorry about that, and ended up typing the question. In the literature, have you found any differences in how communities adapt between rural and urban locations? And to throw one more question at you, Meron. Hi, Meron. Good to hear from you. Says, I've heard lots of case studies on natural disasters, and do we have any case studies of anticipatory action that focuses on conflict and economic shifts? And I know the answer to the second one is yes, but Anita, I hand to you to give us more details there.
Well, because I've got a very bad short-term memory, I will answer the last one first and probably ask you the other one again. So case studies on conflict. So again, on the Hub, we have a really interesting working group called the Conflict Working Group. We have another one on anticipating population movement or displacement. And both of those will lead you to a whole bunch of resources. Specifically on conflict, yeah, you can find case studies, but I think you can find more on population movement, which are often linked to like conflict as a source of displacement. And There's one that I read quite recently that I thought was really interesting that Danish Refugee Council published. It's on the Hub. Christina, I think, is listening. She'll probably put it in the chat soon. And basically, they activated with a 3-month lead time forecasting the displacement of people in Akobo, South Sudan, for those of you that know it, and due to conflict. They forecasted the likelihood that conflict would break out with a whole series of indicators, and you can read about that on the Hub. It was really, really interesting, and they even attempted something that's very difficult in anticipatory action. They even attempted like a kind of a I don't want to say cost-benefit analysis, but they attempted to look at what it would have cost had the conflict broken out and people lost their lives, their assets displaced, and so on. Compared to the anticipatory actions that were put in place to try to prevent the displacement and the actual conflict itself. They compared the cost of those two. So it's quite a nice case study, I think. And if you follow that, the displacement working group page, it will also take you to models that are being used right now to forecast conflict displacement and so on. Yeah. And as predicted, I can't remember the first question now.
No, brilliant. That's super interesting. You've given me a list of things to go off and read about after this call. Thank you. The second question is maybe more for Lina, but let's see if you have anything up your sleeve on it. Meron asked, are there key differences between how people adapt? Oh, sorry, no, it wasn't Meron. Key differences between how people adapt between rural and urban settings?
Specifically, I find the question quite tricky. I mean, I can say until recently, I would say many of our anticipatory action frameworks were more in rural areas because we had a big focus on drought, flood by riverine areas. But we do have increasingly more like the heat wave, attention to heat wave and so on. But we do have increasingly protocols in urban areas. The differences in the outcome, do you mean, of the effectiveness of anticipatory action between rural and urban areas? I think I don't really understand 100% the question.
Kritika, if you can try again with your mic, because it should now be fixed. Just try one more time to unmute, and then you can clarify what you wanted to know. Nope, still not working. Sorry, she the added in the methodologies and effectiveness.
I'll put my contact in the chat, and then maybe we can exchange bilaterally.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Lina, over to you for this on the same question.
Yeah, I don't know if it is worth jumping in here. I did a comparative analysis on adaptation between rural and urban areas, actually in Bolivia. And yes, there are different ways of adapting, and it of course depends a lot on the means of communication and access to information that different communities have. So for instance, in rural communities, of course, they rely a lot on their indigenous and local knowledge, their networks, how they access this information through leaders in their language, and of course what they retain that it's important to them, because for instance, if there is a hazard or a risk, sometimes they are just not willing to move or change or accept some information because they of course have a lot of attachment to place. I mean, all these let's say cosmologies and ways of interpreting the world change, whereas in urban areas, of course, you have access to television, to social media, so there's a lot of more like spreading the information. The information can also be more standardized. So for instance, in La Paz, it was mainly in Spanish. So most of the people could have access to this information in a very effective way. And of course, there's a lot of more resources, allocation of resources for specific cases, whereas in remote areas, sometimes it's difficult. So they, of course, rely more on their networks and at the community level. But yeah, there are different ways of adapting, for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Monica, I see you nodding. Did you want to add anything on that point or any of the other questions you've heard before we close?
No, just to say that it's important, as just it was mentioned, to identify what is happening in different communities and sectors to try to fit different implementations for them. It's not going to be that possible as I mentioned, in Bolivia we have wide and plurinational communities, and it's a plurinational territory, to be clear. But what we have been doing is like trying to see how women, how at least in the communities we are working, and can be like replying other levels of our territory, how women, how Asian people participate and also receive the information, and how we can try to improve and contribute for make this more to have equity and inclusion for these people, especially.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And noting that we're now at time, I wanted to thank all of the presenters and everyone that's joined for a really fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot. I have a lot of bedtime reading to go off and do. And this group, and congratulations and thank you to Christina, Soren, and the rest of the Anticipation Hub team, because this group is fantastic. I've rarely seen a meeting where people have so generously exchanged resources, shared ideas, and I think the humanitarian